My name is Sister Nancy Meyerhofer. I am a Dubuque Franciscan and have been a member of this congregation about 55 years. I'm talking to you from my apartment in a fairly poor neighborhood in Honduras. And just a little about myself before I talk about Honduras. As I say, I have joined the Franciscans in 1966. And after formation and a couple of missions in Iowa, I entered the foreign missions and have been living outside of the country most of the time since January of 1980. I started in Chile and lived there in the last 10 years of the dictatorship. Left there in 1989 and then went to El Salvador in mid-year of 1990 to join our sisters there. The war was still happening. It was in the last couple of years of the war, and we lived in a conflict zone. So I got a little taste of the war, which I felt that the military dictatorship in Chile was a good preparation for living in a war zone. And privileged to live the post-war and serve in Salvador for 12 years. Due to the fact that it seemed like people were asking of me a lot of spiritual direction and counseling, I decided to study those two areas. So I took 3 years in San Diego, University of San Diego, studied that and worked also half-time in Tijuana as a counselor in Maquila in a sweatshop, and that helped pay for my studies. At the end of that, in 2005, I moved to Honduras, where I've been ever since. So I'm in my 17th year here now in Honduras. So that's just a little, I am just very grateful to have been able to spend a good 40 years or more in the missions in Latin America. Talking a little bit about Honduras then, some statistics, first of all, you might be interested in these. The projected population of Honduras for this year is 9.57 million people. The minimum wage, there's two minimum wages really here, one for the countryside and one for the city. Supposedly life in the countryside is cheaper than life in the city. So those who are in the countryside, their minimum wage, here the monetary unit is a lempira. And so a lempira is worth, let's see, $1 is worth about 23.4 lempiras, just if you want to do the conversion. So the minimum wage in the countryside is 5,681 lempiras, which translates to about $233.79. And the minimum wage in the city is 8,803.70 lempiras, which translates to about $362 or a little more, a little less than 50 cents though. That would be a month, living on that a month. And one other thing people ask about, because Honduras still is one of the most violent countries in the world. The homicide rate here is 44.7 per 100,000 people. I don't know what it is in the States, in other countries, but those were the statistics I found when I was looking up a little bit of background information, just to fill you in. The country is Spanish speaking. Most of the people are what we would call Ladinos, which means they're a mixture from way back of Spaniards with the indigenous people who live here, but still, besides the Ladinos, there are, I think, 8 other ethnic groups in Honduras. I won't name all of them because they won't mean anything to you, except for one. There's a group of people called the Garifuna. They are African descendants. I think they're the only Black people in Latin America who were not slaves. They were captured and they were being brought to be slaves, and there was a rebellion on ship, and they overcame their captors and convinced them to let them off, and somehow they arrived here on the north shore of Honduras. So these are Black people, and they had that distinction of never having been slaves. They were going to be sold as slaves, but they escaped before that. And there are a number of Maya ethnicities. One is called the Lenca, and when I first moved to Honduras, I lived 10 years in, here the country is divided into what they call departments. We would call them states. And so I lived in the department of Lempira for 10 years, and there was a strong ethnic minority there called the Lencas. And now I'm in another state called Copan, and the ethnic minority here are the Chorti. And probably the most famous archaeological area is in this state or this department called Copan Ruinas, which means the ruins of Copan. And these are Mayan ruins, about 2 hours from where I live. I've been there many times. Whenever I have company, I take them there. And they are like, it's like a mini Tikal. If you have ever heard of the ruins in Tikal, Guatemala, they are bigger, more impressive, but this is the same type of ruins. Pyramids, golf, football field, you kind of call them like totem poles. And they're constantly excavating. They've discovered now tombs, and there's still lots of mounds there. We know that underneath the mounds are more Mayan structures. So it's a work in progress. So, but the Hondurans are, most of the ethnicities are Mayan. There are a few who are not, but, or Mayan descendants. This is a people rich in culture. There's a lot of natural resources in Honduras too. There are mines, gold mines and opals and others, but none of the mines are in the hands of Honduras. They have all been sold to foreign companies that exploit, we call it exploiting. I mean, that's the word they use. And I think 2% of the riches stay in the country. Everything else is taken out. And the bad thing about that is there's no way to, for example, separate the gold, the ore from the stuff that surrounds it without using things like cyanide. And that, of course, goes into the water and causes many problems. You can imagine the types of problems that come from all of that. So mining is a big issue in this country. And politics, first let me name what the situations that make this a very poor country. I would say Honduras is well known for being endemically corrupt. We talk about pandemics. Well, there are endemics, and endemic is something, as you know, that is always going to be there, or is so common that it's beyond pandemic. It's become part of daily life, and that is the situation in Honduras. There is corruption at every level in this country, and it's not just one source. There are so many different entities that collaborate in the corruption that it's a perfect example of social sin, because it's not caused by one person, and one person will not be able to change it. I read a book on this, and it talks about how almost all the institutions collaborate: the police, the government, even the judicial structure, the political structure, certainly. So many of the Congress people are in the pay of some group or another. Oftentimes, cartels, drug cartels. So endemic corruption. And when I say it's found at every level, it's just a part of life. For example, kids think nothing of cheating in school because the educational system is pretty much dictation, memorization, taking notes, and then spewing it back. It's not a very creative system. It's not really intended to teach people to think. It's the only country where I've seen to graduate from high school, you have to study the national anthem, which is long, and you have a whole long test just on the national anthem. If you don't pass that, you don't graduate. I don't see what that has to do with having studied, commerce or literature or what else. But if you don't pass that test, you will not graduate. The whole idea is to instill an unthinking patriotism. Anyway, that's my critique. So that's one of the situations. Another is pervasive poverty. As you saw when I gave the statistic about minimum wage, life here is, you don't get paid very well. If your minimum wage in the countryside is less than $250 a month, and in the city, just a little over $360 a month, and the cost of living is probably, at least for a family of four, is somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 a month. It's very hard to make it here, just with minimum wage. And so there's a real pervasive poverty, and it has a lot to do with the corruption. There's also a lot of food insecurity in Honduras. And more lately, the cost of what they call the canasta básica, which would be like, that would translate into like the basic food basket, is how you literally translate that. So it's the cost of just what people would need for normal everyday life: sugar, beans, oil, that type of thing, has just shot up. Everything is really shooting up lately, very, very expensive. Probably has to do with the pandemic, with COVID. And then there's severe violence in this country. There are gangs. It's a phenomenon in all the cities. There are gangs. I saw a headline yesterday on one of the national papers that says some bus companies pay 5 different gangs a war tax, if they want to survive. And woe be to the owner or the people who try not to pay that, because they just kill you. Even lowly poor people like little ladies selling tortillas have to pay a war tax, to one gang, and sometimes to 2 gangs, and sometimes more if you're a bigger company. So, and if you don't, the violence the reprisals are swift. So there's a real lack of respect for human rights in this country. Pretty much, murder happens with impunity. I know people who have been murdered here, people from our parish. There was a man who lives in the area in the same barrio that I live in, who coordinated all the base communities in this part of our parish, in this part of town. And one night he was walking back home with some ladies, and all of a sudden 2 men came up on a motorcycle and pointed the gun at him. He said to the ladies, "Go away, this has nothing to do with you." He knew he was about to be killed, and he was killed. He was shot there right in front of them. And the 2 men took off. They have never been identified, much less prosecuted, and that's typical. I would say the great majority of murders here are never solved. You have to be somebody very important. For example, about 3 years ago, Miss Honduras and her sister were killed because they were world famous. That murder was solved, but it has to be something really, really important. There is, given all this, no real fair access to economic opportunities and social services. The town I live in, La Entrada, Copan, La Entrada means the entrance. And I think it's gotten that name because if you come from San Pedro, the second largest city in the country, towards Copan, you enter into Copan, more or less in our town, La Entrada, the entrance to Copan. La Entrada is, I would say, a town of probably 30,000 people. We have no hospital here. The best we have is a health center and a Red Cross. So when people are in accidents or shot or something, they're rushed to the Red Cross. They get, first aid there, and then if it's not too bad, they'll if it is bad, they'll remit them to a hospital. And the nearest hospitals are 1 hour in either direction in an ambulance. So sometimes people don't make it before they get to the hospital. And there is no such thing like, I was thinking during the COVID experience, all the stimulus checks that the US government sent to everybody in the States, you know, nothing like that happened here. There is no such thing as a social cushion. As a parish, we made up food baskets and took them out. And that's how I used a lot of the donation. So many of the donations that I received at that time, that's what we used. We bought food packages. And that also happened during when we had two big hurricanes, Iota and Eta. Parts, especially, not so much here in town, but we received a lot of refugees in town. And we were giving them food packages, and we took them out to the countryside, called people, said, we're bringing them as far as we can get. Then we dropped them off, and they would like rig up like a rope across the river and come across and pick up the packages, take them back home, however they could, you know. Anyway, these were all adventurous times between the COVID and the hurricanes. The last couple of years have been interesting, to say the least. Politics, just a few words quickly about politics. You probably have heard that our former president has been arrested. He's under house arrest because the US has asked that he be extradited to the States. His brother, Tony Hernandez, was judged and found guilty of narco traffic, and he was given life plus 30 years. And this president, his brother, Juan Orlando Hernandez, is accused of being a narco president. He apparently received $1 million in donations from Chapo Guzman for his second campaign, because he was reelected president, which isn't supposed to happen. You're only supposed to be president for 1 year. He's the first man who became president twice, but that's because he got rid of 4 justices on the Supreme Court, named his justices, and they allowed him to run for office again. The woman who ran against him that time supposedly won, but there was something that happened. All of the electricity was cut off in the country for a number of hours. And she had an insurmountable lead, but when the electricity came back on, he gradually won. So now we just had elections in November of last year. The woman who ran then ran again now and was elected. She's the first female president that we've ever had in Honduras. She is of a leftist persuasion. Juan Orlando is a rightist. We'll see how things go. She said in her inaugural address, I have inherited a bankrupt country. Those are her words contextually. And then she proceeded to give some statistics, which were really quite sobering. It's all eyes are upon her for many reasons. We'll see how it does for her. A few words on family structure. Here, it's the traditional family, husband, wife, children. But what is very typical here is infidelity. Many men have children outside of marriage. They have their official wife, then they have what we call, here the word is sucursal. When you have a main bank and then it has, smaller banks that are, of the same chain, well, that's a sucursal. So we have like the main family, and then we have the husband has other families outside the structure. Very common here, very common. A lot of people believe it's impossible for a man to be faithful. I think there are faithful men here, but they're probably few. But then I think, well, for a man to be unfaithful, there has to be a woman who cooperates. So, there's both sides. Families are now they're not so big, but until recently, families were very large. 8, 10, 12, 14 children was typical. But that's probably because most families live in the countryside, and like the 2 main crops for people to live on are corn. They plant corn and they plant beans, and this is all done by hand. Harvesting is also done by hand. And then some people have coffee, which is the cash crop. And the harvesting of coffee, the coffee bush, I think flowers 3 times. So between probably end of October and beginning of March is the coffee picking season. And the same bush will have berries ripening at 3 different times on the bush. And for many people, that's the only time they have an income. They go and pick coffee. And whole families go and pick coffee. And they don't get paid that well, but it is an income. So given all that, my congregation's presence here in Honduras, we've been here 17 years as a congregation. We've been in, some sisters are still in Gracias, which is where I began. We got to be 6 sisters there and decided that was too much of a presence for one small town. So then we divided and 3 of us came here to where I am living now in La Entrada, and 3 stayed in Gracias. There's about 2 hours difference between us, but the place where I live is halfway between Gracias and the airport in San Pedro. So it's very strategic. For example, yesterday, we had a guest who was with us for about 10 days. And so Sister Pat Farrell, and she came and stayed overnight with me, which broke up the trip. And then they took off at about 8 o'clock this morning, had a leisurely trip to the airport. And it was only about 2.5 hours on it, if there's not bad traffic, to get her to the airport. So anyway, my work here in Honduras has pretty much centered on 2 things. In Gracias, I did a lot of work with youth. I started the youth program there, youth groups, did prison ministry. The parish there has a Catholic radio. So I had a program on the radio, a weekly program. I worked with evangelizers and trained Eucharistic ministers. It was pretty much a lot of things, because when I went, I was the first Franciscan to arrive here in Honduras. I came alone and did a discernment. I took 4 months to get to know the reality of the diocese, and was in dialogue with the bishop and told him I thought maybe Lempira was a good place to go, because there were no religious at all in all of Lempira, in that state. And so then he said, if you're going to Lempira, he said, go to Gracias, because that's the capital. And I did. It was a good decision on his part. So it was virgin territory, really. I think I was the first religious woman ever to arrive and work there and live there. So it was a very good 10 years. But then as we grew, we received members, Latinas, and more sisters came from the States. We decided to expand our presence. And so 3 of us came here to La Entrada. And here my work has been pastoral also, but it also includes a strong doses of spiritual direction and pastoral counseling at a local and at a national level. I give workshops for congregations when they ask it. Here, my principal work in the parish is I'm in charge of catechesis. It all pretty much went down the chute with COVID, because we were prohibited to have meetings. Last year, we started gradually having meetings, and I was able to form a directiva, which is a directive of catechists. Our parish is divided into 10 zones. It's enormous. It could easily be 3 parishes. We have well over 100 villages, 2 priests, and a lot of evangelizers, a lot of Eucharistic ministers, myself. And where was I going with that? Oh, so the pastor asked me to set up the catechetical program and made me in charge of it. So I asked the directive, which is a representative of catechetics from every one of the 10 zones, should we try and have a retreat at the end of last year, because it had been a couple of years since we had one, and they all said yes, because they were hungry to get together again. So I asked them how many people they thought we'd get. They said, about 190 catechists. So that was, I ran off 200 copies of materials and, structured the day with 3 presentations, a mass and all that. We ended up having 230. So there was a real hunger for for formation on the part of the catechist. And that to me is very heartening. The challenge here is we're trying to set up something like a CCD program where you have catechesis every year, and it doesn't just focus on sacraments, but always catechesis in this country has focused on sacraments. And after they get the sacraments, they disappear. And so we're calling this the School of Faith, and trying to have something every year, and sacramental preparation is incorporated into it. But before and after, we hope to keep on, and it's a big challenge to try and change the mentality. I can't say that we've done a very good job, and COVID didn't help. So now we're back trying to structure. Usually what I do is I have, with all the catechists in the parish, I have 3 big moments. Twice during the year, I will meet with all the catechists and give them formation on different topics like spirituality or methodology or dynamics, something like that. And at the end of the year, and this is divided up because geographically, this is a really big parish. It extends all the way to Guatemala. And so I'll do, like in March and in like August, on Saturday, I'll meet in a rural part of the parish with 4 zones, and about 100 catechists will come to that. And on Sunday, I'll meet the other 6 zones here in town. They're the ones who are a little closer, and I'll have another 100 or so there. So I do that twice a year. And then at the end of the year, not the end because a lot of people go and pick coffee, but sometime in October, all the catechists are invited to come. And we have a big church here, a really big church, and they all fit in that. We start with Mass, and then we're there all day until about 3:30. And then I have like a retreat, like 3 retreat talks, basically. And they get into small groups, and they love getting into small groups, integrated groups from different parts of the parish. So they meet other catechists. And they really like that because they hear each other's stories and they reflect together on themes. So that's pretty much. And then my congregation, lastly, has been very active in a project you may have heard of called Sister Water Project. We help do water projects in Tanzania, Africa, and here in Honduras. The water here, from the very first day, my very first conversation with the bishop when I came to Honduras, he said, "Don't drink the water." I said, "I've always drunk the water. I drank it in Salvador. I drank it in Chile. I drank it in Salvador." He said, "Don't drink it here." And he gave me an example of a foreign missioner who didn't take his advice and ended up having worms in the brain. So trichinosis, something like tricky, I don't know what you call it, but anyway, that convinced me. And so there's a real need here for potable water, for good water. And so the problem with Honduras is usually the water sources are far away. You have to dig by hand through rock and shale, and sometimes it's like 19 miles from the water source, something like that. It's not easy, and it's a very expensive project. And so my congregation has done a number of water projects here in Honduras. It's very good for the people, and it's very good for the volunteers who come here, because there have been teams who've come to spend a week or 2 weeks helping with the water projects. And I think for many people, it's been a real conversion experience to see how hard daily life is here. It's much easier to do the water projects in Africa because they do a thing there called circle wells. They're cheap, they're easy, and a lot more people, I think, are able to be helped. So I think we do a lot more. I think we've done well over 100, I think 200 wells in Africa. I think we've had probably like 20 projects here and helped 20 projects. We don't take charge of a whole project. We work with other entities like World Vision or hydraulic engineers or something like that to do a project, because they're so expensive. We could never finance, or we could maybe finance one, and that would be it. So the water project tries to help other partners finance a number of projects. That's a whole different area. That could take an hour just to explain how a water project is put together. But it's been life-changing for many people to have access to clean water. And another area where we did help get water besides rural areas in the parishes and other parts of the country is for the prison, that prison that I mentioned that I did prison ministry in. We did 2 water projects there, and that really helped because there was an awful lot of waterborne sickness in the prison until they got good water. So I think my half hour is up. So I thank you for your attention. There, in some countries where I've been, they have what they call AFPs. It's where it's something I think you have in the States, something like Social Security. A portion of their salary, if they earn a decent salary, is put into an AFP. They can choose which AFP they want. That in theory, that's good, but what has happened in every country I've been in is that someone has robbed the money. Again, the corruption. And so teachers, their pensions, they're gone. Nurses, their pensions are gone, etc. So, and thousands of people die because of that, because of the corruption. So in theory, there's something of a social net, but in actuality, it's not working. And most people, like people in the countryside, they would not be having deductions taken. They don't have a salary for things to be deducted from. So that's why when COVID hit, it was such a tragedy here because many, many people live day to day, like the taxis. Our taxis here are what we call tuk-tuks. They're little motorcycles with a carriage on it, 3-wheelers. You see them in India a lot. Well, they're here too. And those people work, they earn their living every day. That's it. People who sell tortillas, people who sell food, all these things were closed down. You know, I do not know how they lived. I do not know, except, you know, there was just a lot of solidarity amongst the poor and some others. And the parish did what it could to help too.
I'm interested also in when you talk about corruption, and I mean, you can see and just the endemic nature of corruption and how it affects. I mean, it affects the nature of performance in school, you know, where you see cheating as a viable option, you know, a norm. Same with, I mean, it's affecting the domestic church. It is, you know, they're just when everything is corrupt, how do you maintain hope? Like, how do you personally, and how do the people that you work with, like, where does hope spring from for them?
You know, this is where hope comes from, the fact that these are people of great faith, deep faith, just a very faith-filled people. The previous pastor, I won't name him, but I think he started out with a big bang, but he was here 11 years, and I think he was corrupt, frankly, from things I hear. He had his addictions and he had his weaknesses, and by the time he left, I think the church was in decadence. It had gone downhill. But there are 2 things I think that kept the church going, this parish going. One is the base community structure. Some of these base communities have been going for 25 years, you know. And the other is they have a practice here of, I think we call it the traveling blessed sacrament, to have, I don't know how else to describe it, but they have a consecrated host and a little monstrance. And I said the parish is made up of 10 zones. The municipal zone is zone 2, and it's divided into 8 sectors. So every week, one sector has the Blessed Sacrament in its sector, and it goes from house to house in that sector. And the people have vigils every night, and they pray and they talk about miracles that happen. And on Sunday night at the evening mass, the sector comes in procession with the Blessed Sacrament. And at the end of mass, it is the sector that's going to receive it comes up into the sanctuary. The people all stand there, and the people who are handing it over line the central aisle, and they have flowers and candles. So they hand over, a representative, a Eucharistic minister hands over the Blessed Sacrament to another Eucharistic minister who receives it in the name of the sector, and they process out through this whole thing of flowers that they're holding over them. They process out and they go to their sector, and it'll be there for a week, and that's every week. And that had been going on, I think, for at least 12 years. Now, during the pandemic, it was interrupted, but now they started it again. I think that also helped the parish continue to function, even though there wasn't very good leadership from the priest for a number of years. The pastor who came in after him, who came here just a few months before I did, told me when he came, there wasn't a stick of furniture in the rectory. There wasn't a penny in the bank. There was no lists of names of people that he could contact. He started from scratch. And he had a huge debt to pay. Now he's being changed. This pastor is being sent somewhere else. There is no debt. All the debts have been paid. But he has done a wonderful job with infrastructure in the parish. Really, because it was falling apart physically. He repaired it and did a lot of good additions. He's just very capable, and he's a very pastoral man as well. So we have, both here. We have both. Luckily, I have been working with a very good priest, very good pastoral man. So
alive, but what does the domestic church there look like in terms of, how faith is lived in the homes and is passed on?
There are a number of traditions that people have. For example, when a person dies, they have the all-night vigil. The person is buried here within 24 hours. It's natural burial, because like right now it's 86 degrees and it's 5:30 in the afternoon. So eat your heart out. I hear you're having a cold spell up there. But anyway, so the body cannot be much more than 24 hours, then they have to bury it. So there's an all-night vigil when the person dies. And then for the next 9 nights, there will be prayers, a wake service in the house of where that person lived for 9 nights. And then you'll have on the 9th night, another all-nighter. And this is like a way of supporting the family through a hard time, because they say you don't really know when the spirit leaves the body. So just in case it's hanging around, they're praying and they're supporting the family. So that's, one of their customs. They're very Marian-centered too. They really love Mary. And another thing that's very common here is novenas. You'll have a novena for the patron saint of the parish. You'll have a novena for just about anything that, like when you have what they call Cabo de Año, which is the year's anniversary of when the person died. There'll be a novena to end that year's anniversary for the person who died. Just many novenas. Another thing that they have is what they call Quincianos, which is when the girl turns 15. That's a very, very big ceremony, because lots of women don't get married. So they make a big deal of, they end up in what they call free union, living together. So the 15th birthday is a big deal for the girl. And she has like a pink wedding dress type thing, a number of attendants, a mass. The mother gives her a ring. Sometimes she'll go and do something in front of the statue of Mary. And then there's a big meal and a dance. Well, many poor people can't afford that on their own. So they get a number of godparents. The girl has all kinds of godparents to help sponsor this. And they always look for people who can help them pay for it, So there are a number of, those aren't all, but those are some of the family traditions that they have.
Thank you. What's the name of your parish?
Our parish is, in English, it would be called St. Anthony of Padua, San Antonio de Padua.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
what percentage of the country is Catholic?
It's still over half, but the evangelicals have made great inroads. Especially, there's a lot of support from the evangelical churches in the States. They send a lot of money and missionaries here, and they have revivals here. Right now, this week, there's the Association of Pastors, which has evangelical churches. All are evangelical. They're not like Baptist or Lutheran or something. They're all evangelical. They have a medical brigade here, and they're doing free attention to many, many people who can't afford medical, like the dental work and eyes and other medical attention. They bring medicine with them as well. And that's a yearly thing that they do here in town. So there's a lot of support from the US evangelical churches for that in Latin America.
Yeah.
And so they have made inroads. Plus the fact that, when people's, and that's why I think the base community structure is so important, because it's based on the Bible. It's a weekly meeting, it's prayer, reflection, and it's a way of trying to make your faith a little more real here. And in some areas, it's also become a very strong instrument for raising consciousness about injustice, like in Brazil and South America, especially in Salvador. I think that happened very much. Often when they leave, it's the grandmother who raises the next generation of children. Often. So.
Audrey, did you have any questions you wanted to?
I just had one more, given the poverty down there.
Which, by the way, is about
and
70%, I would say, is poverty.
Yes.
70%.
So I was wondering about the health of the children and the people, whether there was malnutrition or just any
Yes.
diseases that, or their
Yeah.
life expectancy, just because of the poverty.
Yeah, I can't give you the life expectancy, but it's certainly nothing like the States. There's a lot of diabetes, high blood pressure, malnutrition. When it is like 70% is poor, and I would say within that 70%, there's about 25%, which is extremely poor in this country. So that brings a whole poverty is violent in so many ways. So
Thank you, Sister Nancy, for joining us this afternoon or this evening. I think you've given us much to ponder and think about, and opened our eyes and our hearts to the people you work with every day. So we really thank you for taking time to speak with us.
it's my pleasure. I'm happy to support this wonderful effort in your parish. And we could close with a little prayer, I suppose. And whenever I work with people, actually, we start with a little sung blessing. It's invoking the Trinity. So maybe I would do that now. Just sing it and then a little prayer. En el nombre del Padre, en el nombre del Hijo, en el nombre del Santo Espíritu, estamos aquí. En el nombre del Padre, en el nombre del Hijo, en el nombre del Santo Espíritu, estamos aquí. We are here, Trinity, God of all good, you who are the source and summit of all good. We give you thanks for your presence in our lives. We give you thanks for the many good people that we see every day, the many good people who are anonymous but generous and trying to be present and actively support this wonderful project, which is the kingdom. I ask, Lord, that you bless all of us, give us strength, give us consolation, help us in the difficult moments when we don't necessarily feel your presence. May faith sustain us. We pray for those who suffer many injustices in their lives and ask that we may be your loving presence to those who are suffering. We ask Mary also to support and walk with us. She is the first evangelizer. She is model of faith. She is faithful companion on the road. And with her and her son at our side, we know that we are well accompanied. Amen.